In Tragedy, a true crime podcast, we discuss missing persons cases, violent crime, and other sensitive topics that may be difficult for some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. Our show is a place where every story matters and every voice deserves to be heard. To support this podcast, you can subscribe at www.tragedyaTrueCrimePodcast.com for early access to new episodes. And join our Facebook community, Tragedy, a True Crime Podcast, for updates, discussions, and ways to support the families we feature. Welcome to Tragedy, a True Crime Podcast. I'm Elisa.
And I'm Michael.
Today we're joined by Luke Twardowski, Melissa's husband, and someone who has spent years standing beside her as she searches for answers about her sister, Deanna Merryfield. Over the course of this series, we've had the opportunity to hear from several people whose lives have been touched by Deanna Merryfield's disappearance. Through their memories, experiences, and perspectives, we've gained a deeper understanding of who Deanna was, the events surrounding her disappearance, and the lasting impact her absence has had on those who continue to search for answers. Luke brings a different perspective to the conversation. While he never had the opportunity to know Deanna personally, he has witnessed firsthand the impact her disappearance has had on the people who loved her. He's seen the determination that has driven Melissa's search, the emotional toll of decades without answers, and the hope that continues to fuel the family's efforts today. Thank you for being here, and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So our listeners have spent this series getting to know Deanna through the people who loved her. But before we talk about your perspective, can you introduce yourself a little bit and tell us how Deanna's story became part of your family story?
So my name is Luke Twardowski. I am Melissa's husband. We met in 1995 in high school, and I was lucky enough to convince her to marry me in 1999. She's been my person for almost 30 years now, and so we've gone hand in hand through our entire adult life together, pretty much.
And we saw that connection firsthand when we had a chance to meet you guys for the first time a few weeks ago in Las Vegas, which was really cool to connect with you and just spend some time with you and have a conversation. So we'll further the conversation here today. So let's talk a little bit about when you first learned about Deanna and what were your initial impressions when Melissa shared Deanna's story with you?
So there wasn't particularly one moment where, everything kind of came out, right? So, like I said, we met when we were in high school, and it was 5 years after roughly Deanna had gone missing. And so, it kind of started coming out in kind of parts and pieces throughout the years, because it's generally not something you start a conversation with, right? As we kind of got to know each other and I learned more, it was something that I was not myself accustomed to in my life, right? But it seemed like already at that time, it was so much a part of her and her sisters and family's life. It was just kind of already had entered into the DNA, and you could kind of see the impact. So from my perspective, it was really kind of an eye-opener. I was very young too, so it was an eye-opener on the kind of like the rest of the world, but just kind of amazing to see kind of how they're still functioning, right? How they're still going through their day-to-days. And it was a gradual process to kind of come to understanding.
I can connect with this a little bit, although it was several years. I think we had been together, Michael, for, maybe close to 18 or 20 years before you told me for the first time that there was an unsolved homicide in your family. And I don't really know why it never came up, because to me, I'm like, that's kind of an important thing. And I feel like, so when we were driving one day, he's like, we have an unsolved homicide in my family. Yeah. I said, what? This is information I feel like would have come across sooner, but maybe like it just didn't fit in it at some point.
Well, the big thing for me is I had moved away, and I'd kind of become disconnected from the story, and I understood that there was an investigation going on. I understood it was a challenge. I lived in Denver when this occurred, so I wasn't directly connected to it. And it's the only thing I can really say is it didn't feel real until we were, at home from my original home, in Crawfordville, and we were driving down the road, and I saw the weathered sign about the Jodi Kilgore investigation and murder on the side of the road, and that's when I brought it up. I'm like, you may not realize this, but this is my uncle, and that's when I told the story, and that's where it kind of all started.
That's absolutely where it started for us. Yeah,
it's amazing how it's kind of part of you, but you have to kind of almost compartmentalize at times, I've noticed, or things like that. And again, it's not like, here's a bio, right? When you first meet somebody. So it comes out organically. And again, it's part of, like I said, it's part of their life, their DNA already by the time I had met the family. So yeah.
What you just said is actually really funny, because I did actually meet Michael by reading his bio, because we met on eHarmony. And I literally read your bio and you read mine, and I don't know, right, left, whatever, which way you go. eHarmony connected us, and that's certainly not in your bio, but it's like you said, it's not the first thing you put on the table. By the way. And this journey for me has been real interesting, getting to know his family in a much deeper way, because I know for a fact, if we had not started this journey, I would not be connected to Jodi's sisters and his mom in the way that I am. And it's because that we decided to do this podcast, and that I was able to link up with the family, just like all the other families that we're serving.
That's true.
So is there a particular story maybe that you've heard about Deanna that just really sticks with you as you're kind of building a picture of, Deanna?
It's not necessarily one kind of singular story, as much as I guess what is more in my mind is the overall impression. And it's really from kind of Melissa's perspective, how they were close, how they interacted, that I have kind of just a mental image of who she was and how she was, almost third hand, I guess, from Missy's eyes, right? I've seen, pictures, and you can see her as a child when she's excited at Christmas or things like that. And you can kind of see through that lens, kind of the growing up, but mostly it is, like I said, the impression of who she was that really sticks in my mind most.
And I the same from, Michael talks about Jodi and his experience when you were a child, and Jodi always hung out with all the kids instead of going the adults. And I have this picture of this sort of bigger man, kind of husky guy, but he's out running around with the kids. He's throwing the football, taking the kids fishing. I mean, that's kind of the picture image that I have as I've listened to your family talk about him. So you and I are in similar experiences.
Agreed.
Very interesting, because I definitely know if I was in the age group and around, she would be somebody that I would have definitely wanted to hang out with. Like when Melissa says she was her protector and things like that, that really is the impression, right? She was headstrong, not really, I shouldn't say headstrong per se, but not really one to shy away from things. So really wish that I could have met her.
Feels like somebody that you would have connected to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 100%.
I can see us loading up with Jodi and going fishing. That would have been great.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about your experience as a husband and supporting Missy through this journey. So what has it been like watching her dedicate so much of her life to this search for answers?
First off, I'm unbelievably proud and just wildly impressed with how strong she is and how much grace she has, right? There's a lot of, in this situation, right? There's a lot of opportunity for a whole cavalcade of just different emotions, frustrations, hope and realization and things like that. And she's always been probably the hands down the strongest person I've ever met, but also has, just a grace and strength about her that is I have a unique perspective because we got married. We were 19,
Hmm.
so we were kids ourselves, and so we kind of grew along the way together. I was busy, forming my prefrontal cortex, as it were, and it's just she's just been steady. And not to say that there's not been hard times, but she's just really unbelievable amount of, I don't want to say grit, but grit.
Mm.
It's hard because there's ups and downs, right? It's a roller coaster. There's moments where you feel like things are happening, or you're kind of seeking answers and you maybe are getting some answers, and then there's periods of nothing. So it's definitely been an emotional roller coaster. And on top of that, we're still living our life. We had kids, we were, trying to function in society and things like that too. So it's been very amazing to kind of walk by her with this.
It's our understanding that things started really you talked a little bit about times when things are happening and times when things are
Hmm.
not, and it's our understanding that 2007 was a real pivotal year. So
Hmm.
can you talk about that and your experience with Missy and getting that case reopened?
Yeah. So, especially like I said, we were young, and when Deanna went missing, Melissa was a child as well. And so as you kind of start to grow up, you hear things from family, or you hear things, and you know you hear, this is just the way things are, or what can we do type of deal. It's very challenging, especially in the 90s, right? Where we didn't have that level of access to um as much information, and then you could see that it was something that was just on her mind, and really it just gets to a point where it's like enough is enough, and let's try and find answers. And she hit that point in 2007, started reaching out. She had actually a little bit before, as well, but that's when really, she really started pushing to get answers, and really started to make connections. And it really is kind of tied to, if there's an investigator who's engaged, if there's even that little bit of engagement, you take it and you run with it, right? And you start to kind of go from there. And she just kept pushing and pushing and pushing. So,
One thing I wanted to ask about is when I
mhm.
remember we were sitting there at the table and she was kind of telling various stories. And one, I mean, Lisa may have already known this, but I didn't know. But she actually went around with investigators and knocked on doors and things like that. And it seems like there'd be a certain amount of
Yeah.
fear because you don't know what happened, you don't know who's involved, and now we've got Missy knocking on
Hmm.
doors for with people that may or may not be involved. I mean,
Yep.
what was that like?
Yeah. It's kind of a mark of courage, right? Fear is defined by doing the scary thing, or courage is defined by doing the scary thing, even if you're afraid. And there was that element of, yeah, I should be afraid, but she was just so driven and just tenacious with, I'm not going to not get answers, or not going to not try. And so, you know, she's she's gone, like you said, knocked on doors, talked to people, tried to, find things out, or, just any avenue that becomes available, she just tackles it. It's unreal. How she's not going to be stopped by anything. If there's an opportunity that presents itself to try and find out information, she's gonna go get it. And so it's very absolutely impressive. It's one of those things where we wish there was, you know, many, many, many doors to knock on, and one of the doors is going to be the right door. And I think that's how she looks at it, is, one of them is going to be the one that gets us answers.
I'd like to talk a little bit about engagement with law enforcement and
Hmm.
some of the methods maybe that Missy has used to be able to establish that engagement. And I'm asking
Hmm.
because in some of the other families that we're serving, we're really having a hard time and maybe it's just person dependent, investigator dependent, but we pretty typically struggle, either us connecting with law enforcement or whomever is leading the case, or our families as well. And
Hmm.
it'll be
Hmm.
months and they hear nothing. So can you just talk a little bit about what that engagement looked like? And I know it's tenacity, and is she
Hmm.
calling? Is she going in? Is she emailing? Those kinds of things.
Absolutely. Calls, emails, check-ins, starting the Finding Deanna website, a presence on social media, things like that, getting people aware. It's one of those unfortunate situations when you deal with law enforcement where a lot of times they're overtasked. They have a lot of things to do. B, sometimes when investigations are evolving, they have to kind of go at a certain pace, right? And it has been a long time, but it's even a minute is too long, right? When you're looking for answers for a family member. So it can absolutely be frustrating. And I'm sure from the law enforcement's perspective, it's frustrating for them as well because they are motivated just as much to try and, solve these cases or figure out what's happening. Really, it is kind of a little bit of you have to recognize that they're people, right? They're people trying to do the best job as possible. Um, Sometimes you'll run into individuals who see it more as a job and less as this is a person's life. That does happen, but you do run into kind of those individuals who are willing to talk or work in their off time and things like that. And so being able to recognize those individuals and really trying to connect with them is very, very helpful. And it's one of those situations where everybody has their own upper leadership, and there's probably politics involved on the back end or things like that, which can be intensely frustrating for families. It seems to be the more families we talk to, a common theme that there's friction with law enforcement because trying to solve the same problem, but going at it from different angles and different ways. There's times where sometimes it almost feels uh, from them to us almost cold, right? Or almost mechanical in a way. But I think that's kind of part of their process and what they have to do to be able to kind of get to the answers. And sometimes, if there's not resources being committed to it, then you have to really just start asking that question. The squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? So keep asking that question, keep being persistent, keep being like, we're not going away. We are here till the end, right? So, finding out what's the motion in the case? What are you doing? What are you looking into? How can we help? Right? Even that can kind of be a challenge, right?
Oh yeah, it's really good to hear you say that. Regarding the tenacity and calling and being the squeaky wheel. We talk about that quite a bit on the
Mhm.
podcast, and it's been one of the biggest challenges that we've seen is
Yeah.
people like very very often the cases we pick up, the first thing we ask is what's going on with law enforcement, and they'll say, well, nothing. And so our next question is, well, what are you doing? And we
Yeah.
find out that, oh, I sent an email 3 months ago and I haven't heard from anyone else. And we kind of have to go to through the process of, yeah, that's not going to be near enough. There's multiple challenges, as you can imagine. I'm
Mhm.
sure you
Yeah.
faced it on your side as well, and we've looked at it with the Jody Kilgore case to start with, and we've seen it in every case in
No.
some form. So, like for instance, people will call and I'm getting once a month or even once a year updates. And I
Mhm.
just sent an email. I haven't heard back from anyone. I was like, okay, you have to knock on doors. You've got to start making noise. Some people look at this as an 8 to 5 job. Some people don't.
Mhm. Yeah.
Even with Jody Kilgore's case, I think a lot of the mistakes made in the initial investigation were based on politics, because
Yeah.
there was an election going on with sheriff at the time, and so you had various people within the same department, because they were competing for the next run of sheriff, that were not cooperating with each other. And as a
Yeah.
result, the
Oh.
loss was, what the hell happened with the investigation? Because there
Mhm.
doesn't seem to be much of an investigation there. And there was a lot of
Yeah.
mistakes made at scene. And I found out, I mean, we have several, conversations that we've had off the record at this point that we can't go into the details, but we found out basically that there was active, almost sabotage, if for lack of a better term, going on between different people in the investigation. And
Yeah.
the people who lost from that was the family. That's who lost.
Mhm.
And how much time was squandered away while those clues and that evidence just evaporated over time.
Yeah.
And I had the same feeling when I look at some of the details of this case. What happened initially, why I wasn't taking it seriously. The biggest thing that stuck out to me was we
Abs
closed this case twice without
Yes.
really any
Well,
explanation.
and that's has unbelievably frustrating, right? In general, and it kind of touches on situations like this, or having to deal with law enforcement or investigations like this is not really something that's taught in school, right? So in situations like this, there's a lot of times where people will think, okay, well, the law enforcement, the police are on it, the cops are on it. I have faith they're going to do their job, and there's kind of a different reality, right? There are now organizations that will help with, like, this is how you kind of do things, because it's in the moment, especially when something happens, you're not equipped at that time to go into learning mode. Well, now I've got to learn. Now I've got to research. Now I've got to figure out who's the person to call. Where's there, and there's no real clean, easy way. And back then in the 90s, there was even less of a clean, easy way. And I think one of the things that really sticks out to me and frustrates me, and is a term that I absolutely now almost hate myself, is the term runaway.
Yeah.
um Especially in the 90s, different mindset, it is what it is, but oh, they're a runaway, they'll show up. And there is this prevalence of, a lot of times when runaways get reported to police, they return within X period of time. But as Melissa likes to say, like, doesn't matter if she's a runaway or they're a runaway, they are running away for a reason. The people who are put in place to help protect us in society should focus on what is that reason, why, and treat it just as the same, because that was really the kind of the stumbling block was, it's a runaway, we're not going to really try, from the police department's perspective. And even some people were like, oh, I guess they just ran away. And that's people in the community were just like, oh, like, that happens. And no, it really doesn't. I mean, sure, it does, and children return, but then, you know why did somebody call from the house later and say that she's back, and with no follow-up? And why did, their grandmother have to call and check on the status of the case and find out that it had been closed, to get it reopened, to only have it closed again? It's just incredibly frustrating, even understanding what the 90s were like. It's incredibly frustrating that there was so many spots along the way where, um, it just, like I said, I don't know how Melissa's, been able to kind of not just scream repeatedly, kind of looking back at the way that it started and the way things went. Oh,
And this
and ult-
isn't, oh, go ahead.
oh, I was going to say, and ultimately, it was a child who, is missing. Then it doesn't matter, kind of, did they run away? Were they, what happened? You need to know what happened. And that's somebody's sister. That's somebody's daughter. That's somebody's friend, right? It's just mind blowing.
And it's not unheard of, particularly situations where they say, oh, somebody ran away, they'll come back.
Hmm.
But even in our little small microcosm of tragedy, a true crime podcast, we see this situation. Predominantly, it sticks out for me as far as closing the case and not communicating, with
Yeah.
the homicide of LaTanya Thomas, who she was allegedly strangled and a blood clot formed in her neck, and she had a stroke, and she did not recover from that. And an investigation did happen at the time.
Brief one.
A brief investigation happened at the time,
Hmm.
and a probable cause document was taken to the state attorney's office, and they chose not to move forward with that and file charges, which I get, because sometimes, maybe they feel like they don't have enough evidence. But they closed the case. They said,
Yeah.
oh, we don't have enough. We closed the case. So then the local sheriff's office said, oh, okay, we'll also close the case. And then when we hear about this almost 10 years later, the family says, the case is closed.
Yeah.
And we've talked to 8 families, and we have an experience that is very similar to what you are saying.
It's absolutely unreal. And like at this point, right? Especially 35 plus years on, I think people sometimes feel like they can look back now at the history and see the mistakes that were made, and there's almost that element of defensiveness trying to move forward. Like nobody's trying to point fingers. Nobody's trying to, lay blame. Maybe people are frustrated with the way things are going, but now is the time to look at everything and actually let's find her. You know, it's kind of creates almost this feedback loop, as it were, where like there was a mistake made, and the ownership of that mistake seems to sometimes pass down the chain, where a new officer takes on the case. Well, they don't want to say anything bad about their brother or their fellow police officer, so they'll own it and treat it the same as if it was their own, and it doesn't matter if it was a mistake or not. Just move forward, right? That's you know just move forward. Let the family know. Let the
Yeah, I
family
mean,
know.
I couldn't agree with you more on that, because, the big thing for me is, okay, cool, mistake was made. We acknowledge it. Don't make more mistakes because of a previous one.
Yeah,
Start getting
absolutely.
things on track. Start making up is not the right word, but I think what I'm getting
Hmm.
at is, what are you doing? You can't control what happened in the past. What are you doing
Hmm.
now, and what are you doing in the future to move a case forward? And
Yeah,
don't be obsessed with just trying to either minimize or even cover up the mistakes that were made in the past. I'd rather just, okay, we made a mistake. We're working on this. We're moving forward. And this is what we're going to attack next. That's all you have to do. But we spend so much time
absolutely.
talking about the mistakes of the past. Well, we can't fix those. We cannot
Yeah,
fix those.
and even just processes, things that the procedures that they did in 1990 as opposed to how they would approach something now are completely different.
Oh, yeah.
The law enforcement is continuing to evolve, and we understand that, and we are more than willing to always work with law enforcement, and just we just want to know what happened. Melissa, the family wants to know what happened. Um, it's not to say, oh, lay blame at anybody. It's want to know and bring her home. That's a pretty heavy weight that Melissa's been carrying for way longer, and the family have been carrying for way longer than any family should have to. Her sisters, it's just a lot to put on them.
It, it makes me think of the word like resolution. Um,
Hmm.
and they're really my perception of as we get to know and speak to families who are experiencing what you all are experiencing, and like that resolution is, that's not the right word. It's not a resolution. It's a let's bring her home. so that they
Yeah.
have that peace back, so that they have her back with them. And I learn more and
Absolutely.
more as we do this, that resolution is not the right word. Justice is not the right word. Closure is not the right word.
She was a person. She mattered. And when people matter, you find them, you bring them home, and it's important. It's important to those who loved her or love her. It's important to those who knew her. It's important to any person who ever goes missing. They matter. And sometimes it feels frustrating when kind of that feels like it's lost sight of, where like I never personally got to meet her, but I know her. You know what I mean? Like I've seen her through other people's eyes, and the impact she had on people before and after, and she matters.
Something that is important for us as we continue learning new families and being able to meet new families is our ability to better support them. And
Hmm.
I learned from you guys the importance of reaching out, like I'll say, like, beyond yourself. So for the advocacy groups that you all have connected with, and I think in my perception is that is something that your family is doing, that we are definitely going to support our families to connect with some of those
Hmm.
advocacy groups.
There are so many good people. I could spend the next 40 minutes naming names of just so many good people we've met along the way who, resources or support or just, uh, creating a space where Melissa can talk about it and not feel even just weird, right? Like just even that. It's just so important and so amazing to see everything that everybody's doing.
And so we're really grateful, obviously, to be able to connect with you. And Missy
Hmm.
sent us specifically to an advocacy group when we were at CrimeCon. We went and talked to
Hmm.
them. We got their postcards. We shared all their information.
Well, we signed up for
Yeah.
their class
Well, we
too.
did. And
You
I mean,
did?
Yeah, we did.
Excellent.
yeah, you even said it
Uh,
at the beginning. You said there's no
yeah.
training for this. And
Yeah.
I'm like, wait, but there sort of is. We just
Yeah.
didn't know about it. We didn't know that you can access these classes and they can teach you how to speak, not better, but be media ready, we'll say. Because nobody
Well, yeah.
expects the media to come and knock on their door and then say, and tell us what's happening and you're experiencing trauma. And having those resources are something we are just so grateful that you told us about those resources, and we're moving those forward.
We're absolutely grateful for them. We had an opportunity to go to the first advocacy conference, and it really was unbelievably helpful. And it was unreal. It's a group you never really want to become a part of, but being part of the group, there's a lot of wonderful people for sure.
Yeah, I took particularly interest. I was looking at some of their media training, and so because you kind of just mentioned that, and I couldn't help but think of, I think about the average story, that you see on television, and I'm like, and they find a person that they've interviewed, and we all think the same thing. This is who they spoke with out of all
Yeah.
the people that were standing around, and it made me realize, I'm like, wow, this is really an important skill, and I think it's amazing that they put something like that together. I'm looking
Yeah.
forward to going through the class. I just, like I said, we just signed up, got the information in our email, yesterday, the day before or something. And
Oh, that's
so
fantastic.
we're going to go through it because we're here to learn as well. I mean, you mentioned it a few minutes ago, Elisa, that when we started this journey, it was just really about one case, and the volume of information that we've learned from all these interviews is insane.
It
And it's
is.
actually, not only has it changed our approach to these interviews, it has changed our approach to the investigation. It's changed our approach to certain language that's used.
Yeah.
And it's really put us in a situation where we're starting to understand where the gap is between the victim advocacy, law enforcement, the investigation, and just what's happening with missing people. And there's chasms between some of this communication. There's chasms in the investigation. And what we've learned the most, and I think I really took this from Lee Cook. It was a really important lesson to hear from him, is a lot of these cases, while the investigators are doing, well, their job, the investigation, most cases are put to the forefront and solved because of the families getting involved and not just waiting around for a process. And frankly, not to kind of paraphrase Lee, a process and structure that's really more for the criminal than the victim. And as sad as that is to say, it's up to us to change that narrative.
It is so wildly unfortunate that the onus is so heavily put on a family that's grieving
Yes.
for things like that, right? Like, it should not be that way. It should not be, 35 plus years of questions and sadness and things like that. And it should not be where the family who's already going through so much has now another thing put on them. But that's kind of the way it is.
That's the reality right there.
And that is so unfortunate, but it is the way it is. And there's not much you can do about it. And like I said, thank goodness for the people who are out there who've kind of written it down, built the classes, built the, our resources that can help. And to a degree, the law enforcement, I truly believe that generally they want to do good. I think that it may or may not be the truth. It may be something I just tell myself because, you see a lot of unfortunate outcomes, but there's a lot of times where, things get taken care of. So
yeah. And you mentioned it earlier too. And I think it was really good for you to say it because, one of the challenges, I'll speak for myself. I don't want to speak for Elisa here. So I get so frustrated when I see law enforcement's lack of engagement, lack of investigation, missing steps. But I also have to remind myself, like when we talk about Wakulla County, I've been pretty hard on Wakulla County. I mean, that's my home county, and for good reason. I'm not going to be apologetic for it. I think they've deserved everything that I've said. However, on the flip side, I also want to acknowledge, and I have acknowledged, that this is a smaller county. There's less resources, there's less money, there's less time, and the job that they have, because I come from a law enforcement family, I've had multiple members of my family involved in law enforcement. I understand the pressure they're under, the constant barrage of cases, and the time. You just flat out run out of time, and so some that you tend to lean into the ones you can solve, and some of them fall between the cracks, and unfortunately, that the number that fall between the cracks, I think, is much higher than I would like to see.
Absolutely. And I mean, it never should be the story you tell the family of, well, we just don't have the resources. We don't,
right.
There's always got to be, because the impact of, I've seen it, the impact that has on the family. Do you have an overabundance of trust with the law enforcement? Does law enforcement have an overabundance of trust with the family? Like that kind of maintaining that relationship just wears on people. It just is like a death of a thousand cuts, right? It's just relentless. And again, it's a situation that absolutely no family should ever be in. That should not be the responsibility of a family who's grieving or terrified or scared or maybe doesn't have access to the right resources. It should never be put on them to say, everybody has an opinion, right? So anytime anything, is spoken or put out, there's always people who are like, well, why didn't this? Why didn't that? That relentless just, do you think the family has not asked themselves why a million times, has not second guessed themselves a million times?
Oh yeah.
And in a situation where, like it just, like I said at the beginning, it kind of seeps into the bones, and it kind of is a patina on every aspect of life. And that's difficult.
Oh yeah, the one area too that I think I'm not willing to apologize for, I think, is, we talk about this lack of resources. While I do acknowledge that, I also have seen time and time again when resources go to law enforcement and then they don't accept the help. And so we've seen that in our
Mm.
investigations as well, where we've actually contacted, people that are associated formally with the FBI, people that have run their own investigation firms, geographic profilers, statement
Yeah.
analysts, and we've actually gone to law enforcement and say, here's free help. And they're like, no, thank you.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
bothers me. Even like, we don't do this for money. We're doing this for free.
Yeah.
And we do
Yeah.
this in our spare time with little bit we have. And we do as much as we can. I mean, with me, I'm a tech nerd, so I leverage AI for tons of this investigation. And I'm constantly building reports. I'm constantly looking through data and looking for gaps in the investigation. And then here's the crazy part. We have a tip line, and people will call in and give us a tip. And there's even one that it was a pretty amazing tip we got fairly recently about one of our cases. We called the sheriff's office. They said, great, we'll let you know what we find. Crickets. We haven't heard anything.
Yeah.
And we've even had
Yeah.
one of these investigators say, you should stop talking about our case because we're getting too many tips that are not legitimate. And of course, my first question is, how do you know they're not legitimate? How do you know that?
Yeah. Yeah. Like, have you followed them up?
That's right.
Yeah. It's such,
I'll get off my soapbox now.
well, I mean, it is, mileage may vary, but it is, like I said, I 5 years later, and I kind of, my adult life grew up with I say I grew up with Missy, right? But
Right.
you can see the toll that it takes, and just the it's there's exhaustion, and there's sadness, and I have to say it, like I said again, she's the strongest human I know, and um just uh, handles it with such grace that it's I'm amazed every day. But don't tell her I said that.
Whoops. She might
She might
hear
listen.
this.
Oh.
Pretty sure she's heard it.
Yeah.
Well, then let's flip the script a little bit. And
Mhm.
what keeps you hopeful when you're thinking about Deanna?
Hope is kind of a funny thing, right? Kind of hope for answers, hope for bringing her home. From me personally, I hate to be that guy again, but Melissa is 110%. Missy's 110%, and it's kind of nice to see somebody care that much, and people who care that much. So, because sometimes, like, you kind of hear it third hand, or you hear about something and you're like, what, like I said, that she was a person and she mattered, and the hope is to bring her home, and the hope is to kind of be able to heal, right? And so the activity, the outreach, the action of doing things is kind of in and of itself, uh, at least from my perspective, it's a kind of a beautiful effort in a horrible situation. And so it's amazing to see her continue to push, continue to drive, and get people involved, and the family, and how they, they're her sisters, how they deal with it, right? Because there is, definitely an impact on their life. So I don't know if that necessarily is keeping me personally hopeful, but it is kind of an amazing thing to see, and challenging, right?
This kind of makes me think about the conversation we had with Nick Gaylord and grief, and he's another incredible person that we've met along the way, and we recognize and acknowledge that anyone that we're speaking to is grieving, whether it's a missing child or
Mhm.
an unsolved homicide. And we came across Nick, and we had a really great conversation with him, and we're doing everything we can do to support and maybe fill some of those gaps, Michael, that you were talking about. And with that, I have inserted myself in several social media sites in the Killeen area, and it's our intention that this series is heard by lots and lots of people in the
Yep.
local area. So what would you say to someone who may have information but has never come forward?
If somebody has information, our goal and the family's goal, Missy's goal, is not to be punitive. She just wants to bring her sister home. She just wants to know. She wants to find her sister, bring her home. Whatever that outcome is, she wants to bring her sister home. So don't feel like you can't say something, or, just if you know something, just tell her, tell us, share it with the police, share it with, there's so many different avenues, and it's bringing it in everybody's mind. She's still a child, right? Because that's, when she went missing, she was a child, and I don't think anybody would want their child to not be with them. And so if you share any information, you're in effect bringing a child home. So please don't hesitate to do that.
You've been listening to Tragedy, a true crime podcast. Our purpose is to honor victims by sharing their stories through the voices of friends, family, and those whose lives were forever changed. If today's episode resonated with you, we encourage you to subscribe, leave a review, and share the podcast so these important stories continue to be heard. Together, we can preserve their memories and ensure their voices are never forgotten. If you have ideas for cases we should cover or questions about what you heard, you can connect with us through our Facebook group, Tragedy, a True Crime Podcast, on X @Tragedy Podcast, by email at tragedyaTrueCrimePodcast@gmail.com, or by visiting our website, www.tragedyaTrueCrimePodcast.com. Thank you for listening, and we hope you'll join us next time.